The Pantheon's rotunda and classical temple porch have inspired more Western architecture than any other building. Each massive column is carved from a single block of Egyptian granite and topped by the flourishing acanthus leaves of the Corinthian order favored by the Romans. Impressive though it isn't the exterior that gives this building its lofty place in Western art, but what lies behind its great bronze doors. With its opening to the sky, this was the world's largest dome for more than 18 centuries. 5,000 tons of carefully molded concrete, stretching across nearly 150 feet of space. The Greeks had created exteriors of exquisite harmony. It was the Romans who gave the West the grandly conceived interior. Now a church, this is the only major Roman building that survives intact. Pantheon means temple of all the gods, and their statues must have been placed in these temple-like niches where Christian saints now stand, richly decorated with colored marble brought by sea from quarries throughout the empire. Professor Richard Brilliant of Columbia University.
In the 5th century, when the barbarians took Rome, they entered this building to despoil it of its treasures. The splendor of the interior stopped them in their tracks and thus preserved this glorious structure, this magnificent space, until our own time. Space gives content and form to this great building. What we see on the ground level is a great cylinder. The cylinder fuses or merges into the hemispherical dome that lies upon it. That fusion is so complete because the architect has shaped this interior both vertically and horizontally in such a way as to suggest that the building interior contains a perfect form, that perfect form known as the sphere. The paradox encountered in this structure is that space, so ordinarily thought of as being defined by architecture, instead defines architecture. The true substance of the building is space. As you can see, the coffers, meant solely to organize, to structure our visual experience, recede towards the oculus, culminating in that passage, not an escape, but a kind of communication between the interior space defined by this extraordinary building and the space of the cosmos that lies beyond. That cosmos is perfection. Perfection in the form of a sphere which has no beginning and no end.
Pagan temple, Christian church, bold and original work of art, the Pantheon remains a symbol of universal significance for all the ages. Hadrian's restless intelligence was also at work in the immense and inspired villa complex he built for himself near Tivoli. Like other emperors, he used the shaping power of concrete and vaulted architecture to enclose space in dramatic ways, to sculpt interiors that expanded rather than limited human activity, with an echo here and there of his enduring masterwork. Everywhere in the villa, there were statues, many of them in the Greek tradition he so passionately admired. In this, Hadrian was typical of well-to-do Romans throughout the imperial age.
Roman sculpture, it's such a rich subject. The Romans, their artists, Roman patrons, delighted in the collection of sculpture in the round, sculpture which they displayed in their public places, sculpture which they used to decorate the fora, palaces, gardens, a variety of situations. Sculpture which, I may add, they also put into museums, because indeed the delight in works of art was something that gave enormous pleasure both to the Romans and also to their friends. Indeed, it has become clear that much of Greek art has in fact survived, not in originals, but in Roman copies, much like the copies in this room in the Capitoline Museum in Rome. Such a special work is this statue in marble from Hadrian's villa of a tormented centaur. The statue in dark marble comes close to the bronze original of the Hellenistic period, and one can see what effort the sculptors expended in attempting to reproduce as closely as possible the ancient original. Hadrian, who we must imagine collected this sculpture and enjoyed it, could appreciate a certain moral content in the work itself. The centaur is tormented by lust. At one time, now missing unfortunately, there was a Cupid on his back, a Cupid thrusting the arrows of sexual passion into the centaur, whose arms are bound behind him. The moral lesson to be derived from such a work, and not just from the enjoyment of it, is to be found in the necessity of imposing reason on passion.
The Romans themselves live on in their vast legacy of portrait sculpture. We have Marcus Aurelius as an idealistic young man, and as the weary philosopher emperor who was to die on a lonely frontier. We have the portrait of this aristocratic beauty of the Flavian period, whose slave girls must have been constantly busy with the curling iron. And by contrast, the flaccid hair and careworn expression of a woman in her declining years. Decius ruled an empire more and more threatened by barbarians at its borders and by civil strife within. Looking for scapegoats, he ordered the first systematic persecution of Christians. A vision of the Christian cross was said to have inspired the military victory of Constantine over his rival for the imperial crown in the year 312. This colossal head is a portrait not of Constantine the individual, but of his divinely inspired power. The Senate honored him with the last triumphal arch built in Rome. Nervous about Constantine's interest in Christianity, the senators decorated it not only with new reliefs, but also with earlier works of Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, reminders of the glorious and pagan Roman tradition. They reveal a remarkable change in Roman art. The dynamic compositions and ideally proportioned bodies of the reliefs from the time of Hadrian, whose head has been replaced by Constantine's, give way in the new reliefs to rows of puppet-like figures, static and without identity. Squeezed together as if for security, they seem to express the anxiety and authoritarianism of a troubled empire.